Chapter 1. The Birthday Rescue. Marcie Greeves had always believed that birthdays were sacred. Not in the candles and confetti sense, though she loved those too, but in the way they marked time, stitched together memories, and reminded people that they mattered. For her, birthdays were milestones of connection, proof that relationships were still thriving. And when it came to her siblings, she was relentless about making their birthdays special. So when she and Abigail pushed open the door to James's apartment that Saturday afternoon, Marcie expected laughter, maybe a cake with crooked candles, and Jenna, James's girlfriend of 2 years, beaming beside him. Instead, the first thing that hit her was the smell of wine and the sound of laughter that didn't belong to her brother. The living room was a tableau of casual chaos. Jenna perched on the arm of a chair, glass in hand, surrounded by 3 friends Marcie didn't recognize. They were mid-story, voices overlapping, oblivious to the sisters standing in the doorway. Marcie's smile froze. No decorations, no cake, no James. Abigail shot her a look that said, "What the hell?" Marcie didn't answer. Her instincts were already humming like a live wire. "Hey!" Jenna finally noticed them, her face lighting up. "Marcie, Abigail, come in. We're just having some wine. Want a glass?" Marcie's polite smile felt like a mask. "Thanks, but we're good." Her eyes swept the room again, searching for her brother. "Where's James?" "Oh, he's in his office," Jenna said breezily, as if that explained everything. "He's been in there all morning." Marcie exchanged a glance with Abigail. That was not normal. James loved company. He loved birthdays. Something was off. "Excuse us," Marcie said, already moving down the hall. Abigail followed, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. They found James in his office, hunched at his desk, staring at a blank computer screen. He wasn't working. He wasn't even pretending to. His expression was distant, like someone watching a storm roll in. "Happy birthday," Abigail sang, too brightly. James turned, and the smile he gave them was thin and brittle. "Hey, you too." Marcie closed the door behind them. "What's going on?" James laughed, but it was hollow. "She forgot, sis. Jenna forgot today's my birthday." The words landed like a slap. Marcie felt her blood pressure spike. Jenna wasn't cruel. Marcie had never thought that. But forgetting James's birthday? That wasn't just careless. That was something else. Thoughtless? Malicious? She didn't know. And Marcie hated not knowing. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "James." He shrugged, trying for nonchalance and failing. "It's fine. People forget stuff." "No," Marcie said, her tone sharpening. "Not this." Abigail perched on the edge of the desk, her eyes wide. "Seriously?" She didn't even say anything. James shook his head. Not a word. Marcie's protective instincts arrived dressed for combat. She wasn't about to let her brother spend his birthday sulking in a dim office while Jenna played hostess in the living room. "Get up," Marcie said. James blinked. "What?" "Get dressed," she ordered. "We're going out." He started to protest, but Marcie was already reaching for his ear like she used to when they were kids. "James Greeves, I love you. But if you don't get your sad butt out of that chair and prepare yourself for an adventure, I'm calling Mom and telling her you're being mean to your sisters." James smirked for the first time that day. "You wouldn't." Marcie smirked back, pulling out her phone. "Watch me." She hit dial and put the call on speaker. Their mother answered on the second ring, cheerful as ever. "Marcie." "Hi, honey." "Hi, Mom," Marcie said sweetly. "Your son is being mean to Abigail and me." There was a pause. "James? What did you do?" James groaned. "Mom." "Don't mom me," their mother snapped, her voice rising like a battle cry. "It's your birthday. You should be celebrating, not sulking." Marcie grinned as Abigail bit back a laugh. The conversation spiraled into a comedic back and forth that would have made Abbott and Costello proud. It ended with James throwing up his hands in surrender. "Fine," he said, laughing despite himself. "I'll get dressed." "Good boy," Marcie said, pocketing her phone. "We'll wait." As James disappeared into his bedroom, Marcie and Abigail returned to the living room. Jenna and her friends were still chatting, oblivious to the storm brewing in Marcie's chest. "Wine," Jenna offered again, her smile bright but distracted. Marcie declined with a polite shake of her head. She stood near the doorway listening. The conversation was all gossip and weekend plans, nothing about James. Nothing about his birthday. None of them knew. When James reappeared, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp button-down, Jenna's eyebrows shot up. "Wow," she said, her tone teasing. "You clean up nice. What's the occasion?" James opened his mouth, but Marcie cut him off. She looped her arm through his and started steering him toward the door. "Family tradition," she said lightly. "We're taking him out." Abigail grabbed James's jacket and followed. At the door, Marcie paused, turning back to Jenna. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "We're taking my brother out to celebrate his birthday," she said. "Clearly something you forgot, didn't know, or purposefully ignored. I hope you have a good reason, because we're going to talk after I remind him there are people who love him." The room fell silent. Jenna's smile faltered. Her friends stared, wide-eyed. Marcie didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking like a gavel. Outside, the winter air was crisp, biting at her cheeks. Abigail exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold. "You were savage," she said, half admiring, half appalled. Marcie slid into the driver's seat, her jaw tight. "She forgot his birthday, Abby." "Maybe it was an accident," Abigail offered. "Maybe," Marcie said, starting the car. "But I'm not leaving it at maybe." James chuckled from the back seat, the sound warmer now. "You two are ridiculous." Marcie glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her expression softening. "We're your sisters. It's our job." He smiled, and for the first time that day, it reached his eyes. Back in the apartment, Jenna sat frozen, her wine glass untouched. Mortification washed over her in waves. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling, and opened her calendar. There it was, in bold letters, James's birthday. She had even set a reminder a week ago so she could plan something special. The notification never came. She had turned off alerts during a work crunch and forgotten to turn them back on. "Oh my God," Jenna whispered. She loved James. She adored him. And she had forgotten the one day that mattered most. She stared at the door Marcie had walked through, her stomach twisting. She had to fix this, somehow. Marcie didn't know what Jenna was thinking, and honestly, she didn't care. Not yet. Tonight was about James, about laughter and good food and reminding her brother that he was loved. As the car sped toward the city lights, Marcie felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She glanced at Abigail, who was scrolling through restaurant options on her phone, and then at James, who was humming along to the radio. For now, the storm could wait. Tonight, they were the three musketeers again. And Marcie intended to make sure her brother's birthday ended with joy, not disappointment. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Client. Monday mornings were Marcie's ritual of calm before the storm. She liked to arrive early, sip her coffee in peace, and review her schedule before the office buzzed with calls and design emergencies. Her desk was a curated oasis, sleek, organized, with a small succulent that had somehow survived 3 years of neglect. Marcie believed in clean lines and functional beauty, both in spaces and in life. She was halfway through her second sip of coffee when her phone buzzed with a calendar alert. New client consultation, 9 a.m. The name read, Theo Hartman, Hartman Innovations. Marcie frowned. She didn't recognize the name. A quick glance at the notes told her only that Theo ran a tech-adjacent startup and needed a professional yet creative office design on a modest budget. Translation: chaos wrapped in optimism. She sighed, smoothing her blazer. "All right, Mr. Hartman," she murmured. "Let's see what kind of circus you're bringing." The circus arrived at 9:07, in the form of a tall man with unruly chestnut hair, a navy peacoat dusted with snow, and a messenger bag that looked like it had survived a war. He burst through the glass doors like someone escaping a blizzard, which, to be fair, he was, and stopped short when he saw Marcie. "Hi," he said, breathless, flashing a grin that was equal parts charm and apology. "Theo Hartman. Sorry I'm late. Parking is apparently a competitive sport in this neighborhood." Marcie rose, extending a hand. "Marcie Greeves. Welcome." Theo shook her hand, warm and firm, then glanced around the office like a kid in a candy store. "Wow, this place is very organized, like intimidatingly organized. Do you guys alphabetize your pens?" Marcie arched a brow. "Only on Thursdays." He laughed, and Marcie felt an unexpected flicker of amusement. She gestured toward the conference room. "Let's talk about your project." Theo dropped his bag on the floor and sank into a chair with the energy of someone who had been running on caffeine and adrenaline for days. "Okay, so here's the deal," he began, pulling out a tablet. "Hartman Innovations is a tech startup. We're developing an app that, well, it's complicated, but basically it helps small businesses streamline inventory using AI. Marcie nodded, jotting notes. "And you need an office space." "Yes," Theo said, swiping through photos of a dim, cluttered loft. "This is what we have now. It's not great." Marcie studied the images. Exposed brick, uneven floors, mismatched furniture that looked like it had been rescued from a yard sale. "Not great" was generous. "What's your vision?" she asked. Theo leaned back, his eyes lighting up. "I want something that feels creative but professional. A space where investors walk in and think, these people know what they're doing, but also, wow, they're fun and innovative. You know?" Marcie smiled faintly. "Fun and innovative on a modest budget." "Exactly," Theo said, grinning. "You get me." She didn't, not entirely, but she was intrigued. "What's your timeline?" Theo hesitated. 2 weeks." Marcie blinked. 2 weeks. He winced. "Is that bad?" "It's ambitious," she said diplomatically. "Especially if you want custom elements." Theo leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I know it's a lot, but we've got a big investor pitch coming up, and the space needs to look amazing. If we blow this, we're toast." Marcie studied him for a moment. He wasn't just another frantic client. There was something in his tone, a mix of desperation and determination, that tugged at her. She'd built her career on helping small businesses shine, and this was exactly the kind of challenge she loved. "All right," she said finally. "I'll see what I can do." Theo's relief was palpable. "You're a lifesaver." "Don't thank me yet," Marcie said dryly. "We haven't talked budget." Theo grimaced. "Right. About that." The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind of numbers, sketches, and Theo's enthusiastic but occasionally baffling ideas. What if we had a wall that's also a whiteboard but also a mural of a phoenix rising from the ashes? Marcie listened, filtering the chaos into something actionable. It was what she did best, turning dreams into spaces. By the time they wrapped up, Theo looked both exhausted and exhilarated. "This is going to be amazing," he said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "You're amazing." Marcie smiled politely. "I'll send you a proposal by tomorrow." "Perfect." He paused at the door, then turned back, his grin mischievous. "Hey, do you drink coffee?" Marcie blinked. "Excuse me?" "Coffee," Theo said, as if clarifying would help. "You know, hot beverage, keeps humans alive?" "I'm familiar," Marcie said, amused despite herself. "Great," Theo said, "because I owe you one for not laughing me out of the building. Tomorrow, my treat." Marcie hesitated. It was probably just a friendly gesture. Probably. "We'll see," she said, keeping her tone neutral. Theo grinned wider. "I'll take that as a maybe." And with that, he was gone, leaving a trail of snowflakes and energy in his wake. Marcie sat back, exhaling slowly. She had dealt with eccentric clients before, but Theo Hartman was something else. Charming, chaotic, and, she admitted reluctantly, kind of magnetic. Not that it mattered. This was business, strictly business. Still, as she opened her laptop to draft the proposal, she caught herself smiling. That evening, over takeout with Abigail, Marcie recounted the encounter. Abigail listened, eyes sparkling with mischief. "So," Abigail said, stabbing a dumpling with her chopsticks. "He's cute." Marcie rolled her eyes. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," Abigail said smugly. "Your voice did." Marcie snorted. "Please, he's a client." "Aha," Abigail said, grinning. "A client who asked you out for coffee." "It wasn't a date," Marcie said firmly. "It was a thank you." "Sure," Abigail said, popping the dumpling into her mouth. "And I only watch reality TV for the cultural commentary." Marcie laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." Abigail leaned back, her expression softening. "You know, it's okay to say yes." Marcie hesitated, her chopsticks hovering over the carton. "To what?" "To coffee," Abigail said gently. "To possibilities." Marcie looked away, her thoughts tangling. She wasn't opposed to dating. She just hadn't felt the spark in a long time. And Theo? He was a whirlwind. Complicated. The kind of man who could upend her carefully balanced life. But as she pictured his grin, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his company, she felt something she hadn't in years. A flicker of curiosity. Of maybe. She pushed the thought aside and reached for another dumpling. "We'll see," she said lightly. Abigail smiled, and Marcie pretended not to notice. Chapter 3, Family Dynamics and Friendly Fire. Marcie believed in family dinners the way some people believed in religion. It was ritual, comfort, and chaos rolled into one. Tonight's gathering was at Abigail's apartment, a cozy two-bedroom with mismatched throw pillows and a gallery wall that looked like Pinterest had exploded. Abigail called it eclectic. Marcie called it a design crime scene, but she kept that opinion to herself. Mostly. James arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the sheepish grin of a man still recovering from a birthday ambush. Marcie hugged him tight, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. He looked better, lighter, happier, and that eased the knot in her chest. "Hey, birthday boy," she said, ruffling his hair like she used to when they were kids. James groaned. "Marcie, I'm 31. Stop treating me like I'm 12. "You'll always be 12 to me," Marcie said sweetly, earning a laugh from Abigail, who was bustling around the kitchen like a caffeinated squirrel. "Dinner's almost ready," Abigail announced, waving a wooden spoon like a baton. "And by almost, I mean give me 20 minutes and pray this sauce thickens." Marcie smirked. "Sounds promising." James set the wine on the counter and leaned against it, his expression thoughtful. "So, Jenna's coming." Marcie froze mid-step. "She is." James nodded. "She texted earlier. Said she wants to talk." Marcie exchanged a glance with Abigail, who raised her brows in silent commentary. "This should be interesting." Jenna arrived 15 minutes later, looking like someone who had spent the day rehearsing apologies. Her blonde hair was perfectly straight, her sweater soft and neutral, and her smile tentative. "Hi," she said, stepping inside. "Thanks for inviting me." "Of course," Abigail said warmly, because Abigail was Switzerland in all family conflicts. "Come in." Marcie offered a polite nod, masking the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. She wasn't here to start a fight. She was here to observe, and maybe interrogate later. Dinner was a patchwork of conversation. Safe topics at first, like work and weather, until Jenna cleared her throat and dove in. James, she said softly, her eyes earnest. I'm so sorry about your birthday. I don't have an excuse. I just messed up. James smiled faintly. It's okay. No, it's not, Jenna insisted. I love you. And forgetting something that important, I feel awful. Marcie watched, her protective instincts prickling. Jenna sounded sincere. Her voice trembled. Her hands fidgeted. This wasn't malice. It was human error. Still, Marcie wasn't ready to let her off the hook entirely. James reached across the table, squeezing Jenna's hand. Really, it's fine. Marcie and Abigail made sure I had a great day. Jenna's gaze flicked to Marcie, gratitude and embarrassment mingling. Thank you, she said quietly, for stepping in. Marcie nodded, her tone even. James deserves to feel celebrated. Jenna swallowed hard. He does. And I promise, I'll make it up to him. Abigail, sensing the tension, jumped in with a cheerful distraction. So, who wants dessert? Later, as Jenna and James curled up on the couch, Marcie and Abigail retreated to the kitchen under the guise of cleaning up. Abigail leaned against the counter, her eyes dancing. Well, she whispered. That was civil. Marcie snorted. Barely. Come on, Abigail said, nudging her. She apologized. She looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Marcie sighed, stacking plates. I know. I just worry about him. I get it, Abigail said gently. But James is a grown man. He can handle his own relationship. Marcie nodded, though the protective knot in her chest didn't fully loosen. She loved her brother fiercely. Letting go was hard. Abigail changed the subject with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. So, tell me about Theo. Marcie froze, a plate in hand. What? Theo? Abigail repeated, grinning. Your new client. The one who asked you out for coffee. Marcie rolled her eyes. It wasn't a date. Aha, Abigail said, smirking. Did you say yes? Marcie hesitated. I said maybe. Abigail's grin widened. Progress. Marcie groaned. It's not progress. It's business. Sure, Abigail said, her tone dripping with skepticism. Business with dimples. Marcie threw a dish towel at her. Abigail dodged, laughing. You're impossible. And you're blushing, Abigail shot back. Marcie ignored her, focusing on the dishes. But inside, she felt that flicker again, the one she tried to smother. Theo Hartman was chaos wrapped in charm. Complicated. And maybe intriguing. When dinner wound down and Jenna and James left, Marcie lingered in Abigail's kitchen, sipping tea and staring out the window at the city lights. Her life was steady, predictable, curated like the spaces she designed. She liked it that way, mostly. But lately, cracks had appeared in the calm. A birthday rescue that turned into a family intervention. A client who made her laugh when she least expected it. A question she hadn't asked herself in years. What if? Marcie shook her head, pushing the thought aside. Tomorrow was work, deadlines, budgets, order, and maybe, just maybe, a coffee that wasn't entirely about business. Chapter 4. Design disasters and coffee dates. Marcie prided herself on being prepared. Her calendar was color-coded, her proposals precise, and her projects ran like clockwork. Which was why, when she walked into Hartman Innovations' loft on Tuesday morning, she was not prepared for the chaos that greeted her. The space looked worse than the photos. Cables snaked across the floor like jungle vines. A 3D printer hummed in the corner, spitting out something that resembled a mutant chess piece. A whiteboard leaned against the wall, covered in equations that looked like alien hieroglyphics. And in the center of it all stood Theo Hartman, holding a coffee mug in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, grinning like a man who had just discovered fire. Marcie, he called, his voice bright with relief. You came. Marcie stepped carefully over a tangle of wires, her heels clicking against the uneven floor. I said I would, she replied, scanning the room. Though I didn't realize I'd need a hard hat. Theo laughed, setting down the screwdriver. Yeah, we're in a transitional phase. Marcie arched a brow. Transitional from what? Civilization? He grinned, unbothered. Hey, chaos is just creativity in disguise. Chaos, Marcie said dryly, is also a tripping hazard. Theo chuckled, then gestured toward a rickety table piled with papers. So what's the verdict? Can you turn this disaster into something investors won't run screaming from? Marcie pulled out her tablet, swiping to her proposal. I can, but it's going to take work. And cooperation. Cooperation, Theo repeated, as if tasting the word. Sounds serious. It is, Marcie said, her tone crisp. If you want this done in 2 weeks, we need clear decisions. No last-minute changes. No Phoenix murals. Theo's grin widened. You remembered the Phoenix. Marcie gave him a look. Hard to forget. He laughed, hands raised in surrender. Fine. No Phoenix. What's first? They spent the next hour walking the space, Marcie outlining her plan while Theo offered commentary that ranged from helpful to hilariously unhelpful. So this wall, Marcie said, tapping her stylus against the exposed brick. We'll keep it. It adds character. Agreed, Theo said. Character is good. Investors love character. Investors love stability, Marcie corrected. Character is a bonus. Theo grinned. You're very pragmatic. I'm a designer, Marcie said. Pragmatism is part of the job. And yet, Theo said, his eyes twinkling, you make things beautiful. Marcie felt a flicker of heat in her cheeks and immediately smothered it. Compliments were harmless. She was a professional. Beauty and function, she said briskly. That's the goal. Theo watched her for a beat longer than necessary, then smiled. I like that. By the time they wrapped up, Marcie's head was buzzing with measurements and deadlines. She was gathering her things when Theo spoke again. So, he said casually, coffee? Marcie blinked. Now? Why not? Theo said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. There's a cafe around the corner. Best cappuccino in the city. Marcie hesitated. She had emails to answer, calls to make, a schedule tighter than Theo's budget. But something in his grin, hopeful, a little mischievous, made her pause. Fine, she said, surprising herself. One coffee. Theo's smile could have powered the loft's flickering lights. Excellent. Let's go. The cafe was warm and bustling, a stark contrast to the industrial chill of the loft. Marcie slid into a corner booth, inhaling the rich scent of roasted beans. Theo returned with 2 steaming cups, setting one in front of her with a flourish. Cappuccino, he announced, with extra foam. Because foam is happiness. Marcie smiled despite herself. Thanks. Theo settled across from her, his energy dialed down just enough to seem almost normal. For a moment, they were just 2 people sharing coffee, not a designer and a client racing against time. So, Theo said, stirring his drink. Tell me about you. Marcie raised a brow. Me? Yeah, Theo said. I've been talking your ear off about my company. Fair's fair. Marcie hesitated. She wasn't used to clients asking about her life. Most cared only about square footage and color palettes. Not much to tell, she said lightly. I design spaces. I like what I do. Theo smiled. That's obvious. You light up when you talk about it. Marcie blinked. I do not. You do, Theo said, his tone gentle, not teasing. It's nice. Marcie looked down at her cup, suddenly aware of the warmth creeping up her neck. She changed the subject. What about you? Why start a company? Theo leaned back, his expression softening. Because I wanted to build something that mattered. My dad ran a hardware store for 30 years. Small business, big heart. When he retired, I realized how hard it is for people like him to keep up with tech. So, I decided to help. Marcie studied him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Beneath the chaos and charm, there was depth, purpose, tugged at something in her. That's admirable, she said quietly. Theo shrugged, a little self-conscious. Or insane. Depends who you ask. Marcie smiled. Maybe both. Theo grinned. Story of my life. They lingered longer than Marcie intended, conversation flowing easily, about design, about startups, about the best pizza in the city. When she finally glanced at her watch, her stomach flipped. I have to go, she said, standing. Deadlines. Theo rose too, his smile warm. Thanks for saying yes. Marcie nodded, her pulse oddly quick. Don't make me regret it. Theo laughed. Never. Back at her office, Marcie tried to focus on her proposal, but her mind kept drifting. To Theo's grin, his laugh, the way his eyes softened when he talked about his dad. She shook her head, forcing herself back to work. This was business, strictly business. So why did it feel like something more? Chapter 5. The birthday fallout. Jenna was determined to make things right. Forgetting James's birthday had been a colossal failure, and she wasn't the kind of woman to let failure sit unchallenged. So she planned an apology dinner, a grand gesture of redemption. She booked a trendy bistro downtown, ordered a custom cake, and even rehearsed her speech in the mirror. Tonight would erase the sting of last weekend. It was a solid plan. In theory. Marcie wasn't thrilled when James texted her about the dinner. Jenna wants to take me out tonight. Just us. Says it's a surprise. Marcie stared at the message, her protective instincts twitching. Jenna's surprise had better involve actual thought this time. Abigail, of course, found the whole thing hilarious. She's groveling? Abigail said over the phone, her voice bubbling with amusement. Let her grovel. Marcie sighed. I'm trying. Try harder. Abigail teased. You're starting to sound like Mom. Marcie groaned. Low blow. Meanwhile, Jenna was at the bistro, pacing like a general before battle. The table was set, candles flickering, and the cake, 3 layers of chocolate decadence, sat in the kitchen waiting for its grand entrance. She checked her phone for the 10th time. James was on his way. Good. Everything was perfect. Until the waiter approached, looking sheepish. Ma'am? About the wine you requested. Jenna's stomach dropped. What about it? We're out, he said apologetically. Supply issue. Jenna forced a smile. Fine. Bring whatever's good. The waiter nodded and vanished. Jenna exhaled, smoothing her dress. One hiccup. No big deal. Then the fire alarm went off. James arrived to chaos, diners evacuating, staff shouting, and Jenna standing on the sidewalk clutching her purse like a lifeline. What happened? James asked, bewildered. Jenna's voice was tight. Someone burned something. They're clearing the building. James blinked. So, dinner? Jenna closed her eyes. Ruined. James chuckled. Because what else could he do? Well, at least it's memorable. Jenna groaned. I wanted it to be perfect. James slipped an arm around her shoulders, his tone gentle. It's fine. We'll grab burgers. Jenna stared at him, incredulous. Burgers. Best apology dinner ever, James said, grinning. Come on. And just like that, they walked off into the night, leaving Jenna's grand gesture smoldering in the ashes of a kitchen mishap. Marcie heard about it later, via Abigail, who got the scoop from James. They ended up at a diner, Abigail reported, laughing so hard she nearly dropped her phone. Jenna was mortified. James thought it was hilarious. Marcie shook her head, torn between amusement and relief. Maybe Jenna wasn't perfect, but she cared. That counted for something. Still, Marcie couldn't resist a wry comment. Next time, she should just stick to cake. That night, as Marcie curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, her phone buzzed. A text from Theo. Theo, quick question. How do you feel about accent walls? Marcie stared at the screen, smiling despite herself. She typed back. Marcie, depends. Bold or subtle? The reply came instantly. Theo, bold. Like, this wall has opinions, bold. Marcie laughed, shaking her head. Marcie, walls shouldn't have opinions. They should have personality. Theo, personality. I like that. You're good at this. Marcie hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't just about walls anymore. There was a rhythm to their exchange. Playful, easy, warm. She typed, Marcie, it's my job. Theo, and you're amazing at it. Seriously, thanks for making this chaos feel possible. Marcie felt a flutter in her chest, unexpected and disarming. She set her phone down, staring at the city lights outside her window. Maybe Abigail was right. Maybe it was okay to say yes to coffee, to possibilities, to whatever this was becoming. Chapter 6. Sparks and Setbacks. Marcie had always believed that design was about harmony. Colors that complemented, textures that balanced, spaces that breathed. Which was why walking into Hartman Innovations on Thursday morning felt like stepping into a war zone. The loft was louder than usual. A 3D printer whirred like an angry bee. Someone was arguing about code near the window, and Theo was in the middle of the room, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled, directing two interns who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Marcie, he called, spotting her instantly. His grin was bright enough to cut through the chaos. You're here. Thank God. Marcie set her bag down, surveying the scene. What happened? Theo gestured wildly. We tried to move the conference table. Turns out it's heavier than my optimism. Marcie bit back a laugh. You didn't wait for the movers? Theo shrugged, sheepish. They're late, and we have a walkthrough with the investors tomorrow. I panicked. Marcie sighed, rolling up her sleeves. Show me the damage. The table was wedged halfway through a doorway, like a stubborn mule refusing to budge. Marcie crouched, assessing angles. You tilted it wrong, she said. It needs to go vertical. Theo crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Warm, woodsy, distracting. Vertical, he repeated. Got it. They worked together, maneuvering the table inch by inch. It was awkward, sweaty, and punctuated by Theo's running commentary. Okay. Lift. No. Tilt. Wait. Don't crush your fingers. Theo, Marcie said through gritted teeth. If you keep talking, I'm going to crush your fingers. He grinned, unbothered. Noted. Finally, with a triumphant shove, the table slid into place. Theo threw his hands up like a victorious quarterback. We did it. Marcie straightened, brushing dust off her blazer. You're welcome. Theo grinned, his eyes warm. Seriously, Marcie, you're a lifesaver. She felt a flicker in her chest, unexpected, disarming. It's my job, she said lightly. Yeah, Theo said, his voice softer now. But you make it look effortless. Marcie met his gaze, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. It was just the two of them, standing in a sunlit loft, something electric humming in the air. Then the door opened, and the moment shattered. Theo. The voice was smooth, feminine, and laced with surprise. Marcie turned. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, elegant, with glossy dark hair and a designer coat that probably cost more than Marcie's monthly rent. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped inside, her eyes locking on Theo. Theo froze. Claire. Marcie blinked. Claire. The name landed like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples through the room. Wow, Claire said, her smile sharp. You weren't kidding when you said you were busy. Theo cleared his throat, his easy charm faltering. Claire, this is Marcie. She's designing the space. Claire's gaze flicked to Marcie, assessing, cool. Nice to meet you. Marcie nodded, her tone polite. Likewise. Theo shifted, looking like a man caught in a storm without an umbrella. What brings you here? Claire's smile didn't reach her eyes. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd see how you're doing. Marcie didn't need a degree in psychology to read the subtext. This wasn't a casual visit. This was an ex-staking territory. Theo rubbed the back of his neck. His usual confidence dimmed. I'm good. Busy. Claire's gaze swept the loft, lingering on the chaos. Clearly, Marcie felt like an intruder in her own project. She busied herself with her tablet, pretending to check measurements while the tension crackled. Finally, Claire turned to leave, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. Well, good luck with all this. Theo managed a strained smile. Thanks. The door closed, and silence settled like dust. Marcie straightened, her voice calm but edged. X. Theo winced. Yeah. Recent? She asked. 6 months, he said quickly. It's over. Marcie nodded, though the knot in her stomach didn't ease. She wasn't angry. She had no right to be, but the moment they'd shared felt complicated now. Theo stepped closer, his expression earnest. Marcie, I swear, that's ancient history. Marcie met his gaze, her tone steady. Good, because I don't mix business with drama. Theo's lips curved into a faint smile. Fair enough. But as Marcie packed up her things, she couldn't shake the feeling that drama had just walked through the door wearing designer heels. That night, Marcie sat at her kitchen counter, nursing a cup of tea and replaying the day. The table, the laughter, the spark, and then Claire, sweeping in like a plot twist. Marcie wasn't naive. People had passed. She had one too. But something about Claire's presence unsettled her. Not because Theo had an ex that was normal, but because of the way he'd looked at her, like a man still carrying unfinished chapters. Her phone buzzed. A text from Theo. Theo, sorry about today. Claire showing up was unexpected. Marcie stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. She typed back, Marcie, it's fine. Just keep the focus on the project. The reply came almost instantly. Theo always. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Marcie exhaled slowly, setting her phone down. She wasn't sure what that meant, or what she wanted it to mean. All she knew was that tomorrow, she had a design to finish. And maybe, just maybe, a heart to guard. Chapter 7. The sibling intervention. Marcie should have known something was up the moment Abigail texted. Family dinner at my place. No excuses. Abigail was spontaneous, but she wasn't bossy, unless she was plotting something. Still, Marcie agreed. She loved her siblings, even when they were scheming. Saturday evening found her walking into Abigail's apartment, arms full of wine and dessert. The space was buzzing with music and laughter. James was already there, lounging on the couch with a beer, looking far too smug for someone who'd been ambushed by a birthday rescue last week. Hey sis, he said, grinning. You look professional. Marcie arched a brow. It's called a blazer, James. Some of us have jobs. James smirked. Some of us have lives. Marcie narrowed her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Before James could answer, Abigail swooped in, all sunshine and mischief. Marcie, you made it. She hugged her sister, then snatched the wine from her hands. Perfect. We're celebrating. Marcie frowned. Celebrating what? Abigail's smile was too bright. You'll see. Dinner was lively. Abigail's pasta, James's jokes, Marcie's attempts to keep the conversation on neutral ground. But halfway through dessert, Abigail cleared her throat and launched her offensive. So, she said casually, how's work? Marcie relaxed. Safe topic. Busy. I've got a big project for a startup. Tight deadline, tight budget. James leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Is this the project with Theo? Marcie froze, fork halfway to her mouth. How do you know about Theo? Abby told me, James said, grinning like a cat with cream. Apparently, he's cute. Marcie shot Abigail a glare. Really? Abigail shrugged, unrepentant. You said he asked you out for coffee. It wasn't a date, Marcie said firmly. It was a meeting. James smirked. Sure, a meeting with foam art. Marcie groaned. You two are impossible. Abigail leaned in, her tone conspiratorial. Marcie, you've been single for 2 years. 2 years. It's time. Marcie set down her fork, her voice calm but edged. Time for what? Time to stop hiding behind work, Abigail said gently. You deserve more than deadlines and color swatches. James nodded, surprisingly serious. You're amazing, sis. Any guy would be lucky to have you. Marcie felt a flicker in her chest. Warmth, gratitude, and something else. Vulnerability. She masked it with humor. Thanks, Dr. Phil. Abigail grinned. We're just saying, maybe give Theo a chance. Marcie hesitated, her thoughts tangling. She liked Theo, more than she wanted to admit. But liking someone was easy. Letting them in, that was harder. I'll think about it, she said finally. Abigail beamed. That's all we ask. James raised his glass. To Marcie, and maybe to possibilities. Marcie clinked her glass, laughing despite herself. You two are relentless. Family, Abigail said, winking. It's our job. Later, as Marcie drove home, their words lingered. You deserve more than deadlines. Maybe give Theo a chance. She wasn't opposed to love. She just hadn't felt ready. But now there was a spark, a flicker she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed at a red light. A text from Theo. Theo, quick update. The accent wall is happening. Brace yourself. Marcie smiled, shaking her head. Marcie, bold or subtle? Theo, bold. Like, this wall has opinions, bold. Marcie laughed, her fingers flying. Marcie, walls shouldn't have opinions. They should have personality. Theo, personality. I like that. You're good at this. Marcie stared at the screen, her heart doing something it hadn't in years. Skipping. Maybe Abigail was right. Maybe it was time. Chapter 8. The big pitch. Marcie had faced tight deadlines before, but this one felt like threading a needle during an earthquake. 2 weeks of design work had boiled down to this Hartman Innovations investor pitch. The loft had transformed, mostly. The mismatched furniture was gone, replaced by sleek modular pieces. The accent wall Theo insisted on was bold but tasteful. A deep teal that added energy without screaming for attention. Plants softened the edges, and pendant lights cast a warm glow over the space. It wasn't perfect. Marcie never called anything perfect. But it was good, professional, inviting. A space that whispered innovation instead of chaos. Theo, however, looked like he'd swallowed a live wire. They're coming in 20 minutes, he said, pacing like a man on trial. 20 minutes. Marcie set down her tablet, calm in the eye of his storm. Everything looks great. Theo stopped, running a hand through his hair. You're sure? Because if this goes south, we're toast. Marcie smiled faintly. Theo, the space is solid. Investors will love it. Theo exhaled, then grinned, nervous, boyish. You're amazing. Marcie ignored the flutter in her chest. Focus on your pitch. The first investor arrived early, followed by 2 more. They were sharp suits and sharper eyes, scanning the loft like hawks. Theo launched into his presentation, his voice steady at first, then gaining momentum. He was good, passionate, articulate, painting a picture of small businesses thriving with his app. Marcie stood near the accent wall, observing. She wasn't part of the pitch, but she knew the space mattered. Investors didn't just buy ideas, they bought impressions. And this loft, with its clean lines and creative energy, was part of the story. Everything was going smoothly until the projector died. 1 second, Theo was clicking through slides. The next, the screen went black. He froze, panic flickering in his eyes. Technical glitch, he said, forcing a laugh. Give me 1 second. Marcie was already moving. She crouched by the projector, checking cables. Loose connection. Easy fix, except the cord was frayed, and the backup wasn't in sight. Theo knelt beside her, whispering, We're doomed. Marcie shot him a look. Not yet. She unplugged the cord, rerouted it through a surge protector, and hit the power button. The screen flickered, then glowed to life. Theo exhaled like a man reprieved from execution. You're a genius. Marcie smirked. Add that to your pitch. Theo grinned, then turned back to the investors, his confidence restored. As I was saying, the rest of the presentation was flawless. When Theo finished, the investors exchanged glances, impressed glances. One of them smiled. You've got something here. Theo's relief was palpable. He shook hands, cracked jokes, and walked them to the door like a man floating on air. When the last investor left, he turned to Marcie, his grin wide and unguarded. We did it, he said, his voice husky with adrenaline. Marcie, we actually did it. Marcie smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. You did it. Theo stepped closer, his eyes bright. No, we did. You saved me. Marcie opened her mouth to deflect, but the words tangled. Because in that moment, sunlight streaming through the windows, Theo standing inches away, his gratitude raw and real, something shifted. The air felt charged. His gaze dipped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and for a heartbeat, Marcie wondered if he was going to kiss her. She wasn't sure if she wanted him to, or if she wanted him to want to. But then Theo blinked, the spell breaking. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Sorry, I'm wired. Marcie swallowed, her voice steady. Understandable. Theo laughed, a little awkward. Coffee? To celebrate. Marcie hesitated. Coffee had become their thing, safe, casual. But after that almost moment, nothing felt casual. Sure, she said finally. Theo's smile returned, softer now. Great, let me grab my coat. The cafe was quieter this time, the hum of conversation a soothing backdrop. They slid into a booth, steaming mugs between them. Theo looked lighter, his usual whirlwind energy tempered by relief. So, he said, stirring his coffee. Thank you. For everything. Marcie smiled. It's my job. Theo shook his head. No, you went above and beyond. Most designers would have bailed when I said 2 weeks. Marcie shrugged. I like a challenge. Theo's grin was slow, warm. You're full of surprises. Marcie sipped her coffee, hiding the smile tugging at her lips. So are you. They talked about the pitch, about plans for the space, about nothing and everything. And somewhere between laughter and silence, Marcie realized something. She liked being here, with him, not as a designer, not as a professional, just Marcie. When they finally stepped outside, the evening air was crisp, the city lights shimmering like stars. Theo walked her to her car, his hands shoved in his pockets, his smile lingering. "Big day," he said softly. Marcie nodded. "Big day." Theo hesitated, then leaned in. Not for a kiss, but close enough that his voice felt like a secret. "I'm glad you were part of it." Marcie's heart thudded. "Me too." And then he stepped back, his grin crooked. "See you tomorrow?" Marcie smiled. Tomorrow. As she drove home, her thoughts tangled like threads, Theo's smile, his gratitude, that almost kiss. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. Chapter 9. Confessions over champagne. Theo Hartman was not a man who celebrated quietly. When the investors confirmed their commitment, emails sent, contracts pending, he insisted on a toast. Not in the loft, not in a cafe, but at a rooftop bar with a view of the city glittering like spilled diamonds. Marcie almost said no. She had deadlines, emails, a life carefully balanced on schedules. But when Theo called, his voice bubbling with excitement, something in her softened. "Just one drink," he'd said, "to celebrate saving my company." And so, here she was, standing on a rooftop under a velvet sky, the hum of conversation around her, the city lights stretching to infinity. Theo appeared with 2 flutes of champagne, his grin boyish and unguarded. "For you," he said, handing her a glass. "The woman who turned chaos into beauty." Marcie smiled, accepting the drink. "You're exaggerating." "Not even a little," Theo said, clinking his glass against hers. "To Hartman Innovations, and to Marcie Greeves, miracle worker." The champagne was crisp, bubbles dancing on her tongue. Marcie let herself savor it. The drink, the view, the moment. Theo leaned against the railing beside her, his energy quieter now, tempered by something deeper. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't think we'd make it." Marcie glanced at him. "The pitch, the company," Theo said, his gaze on the skyline. "6 months ago, I was ready to quit. Burnout, bad timing, too many people telling me I was crazy." Marcie studied him, surprised. Theo was all confidence and charm. She couldn't picture him doubting himself. "What changed?" she asked. Theo smiled faintly. "I remembered why I started. My dad's hardware store. The way he fought to keep up with tech. I wanted to make it easier for people like him. That kept me going." Marcie felt a tug in her chest. Purpose was rare. Beautiful. "That's admirable," she said quietly. Theo turned to her, his eyes warm. "And then you came along." Marcie blinked. "Me?" Theo nodded. "You didn't just design a space. You gave me hope. You made me believe this could work." Marcie's breath caught. She opened her mouth to deflect, but Theo's voice was gentle, earnest. "I don't say this lightly," he continued. "You've been the best part of this whole mess." Marcie stared at him, the city lights blurring at the edges. She wasn't used to words like that, raw, unpolished, real. They slipped past her defenses, settling somewhere deep. "Theo," she began, but he shook his head, smiling. "Don't worry," he said lightly, easing the weight of the moment. "I'm not proposing marriage on a rooftop." Marcie laughed, the tension breaking like glass. "Good. I'd have to say no." Theo grinned. "Fair. But maybe you could say yes to dinner sometime." Marcie hesitated, her heart thudding. This wasn't coffee. This wasn't casual. This was a door opening. A door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. But when she looked at Theo, his smile, his sincerity, the way he made her laugh when she least expected it, she felt something she hadn't in years. Possibility. "Yes," she said softly. "Dinner sounds nice." Theo's grin widened, bright and boyish. "Then it's a date." They lingered on the rooftop, talking about everything and nothing, childhood stories, favorite movies, the worst design trends of the 90s. Theo confessed he once had a lava lamp collection. Marcie admitted she still owned a beanbag chair. They laughed until their sides ached, until the night felt like theirs alone. When they finally left, Theo walked her to her car, his hand brushing hers in a way that felt accidental and deliberate all at once. He didn't kiss her. Not yet, but the promise hung in the air like the last note of a song. "Tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low. Marcie smiled. Tomorrow. Driving home, Marcie felt the shift, the quiet, seismic kind that changes everything. For 2 years, her life had been steady, predictable, safe. Tonight, it tilted, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to straighten it. Chapter 10. Misunderstandings and mixed signals. Marcie woke up Monday feeling lighter than she had in years. The rooftop evening lingered in her mind like a favorite song. Theo's laughter. The city lights. The promise of dinner. For once, the week ahead didn't feel like a grind. Felt exciting. She dressed with care. Nothing dramatic, just a soft blouse and tailored pants that made her feel confident. At the office, she dove into emails, humming under her breath. When her phone buzzed, she smiled, expecting Theo. It wasn't Theo. It was a calendar alert, Hartman Innovations, final design review, Thursday. Marcie frowned. No text from Theo. No call. No playful banter about walls with opinions. She brushed it off. He was busy. Investor follow-ups, contracts, chaos. Still, by noon, the silence felt louder. By Tuesday, it was deafening. Theo wasn't ignoring her. Not exactly. He sent one email about a delivery schedule. Short, professional. No emojis. No jokes. No coffee. Just business. Marcie stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Had she misread everything? The rooftop, the laughter, the almost kiss. Was it all adrenaline and champagne? Maybe Theo regretted asking her out. Maybe dinner was a heat-of-the-moment thing, and now he was backpedaling. She told herself not to care. She told herself to focus on work. And she did, throwing herself into a new project with surgical precision. Color palettes, floor plans, vendor calls. Anything to drown out the nagging voice whispering, "You wanted too much." By Wednesday night, Marcie was exhausted and irritated. She curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through emails. Her phone buzzed. A text from Abigail. "Abigail, so, how's Mr. Startup?" Marcie stared at the screen, then typed, "Marcie, busy, focused on work." Abigail. Translation. Radio silence? Marcie hesitated, then sent, "Marcie, pretty much." The reply came fast. "Abigail, Marcie, don't spiral. Maybe he's swamped." Marcie sighed, setting the phone down. Maybe Abigail was right. Maybe Theo was drowning in investor paperwork. But the ache in her chest didn't care about logic. Thursday arrived with rain and tension. Marcie drove to the loft, rehearsing her professional smile. She would be calm, polished, unaffected. Theo was waiting by the door, his hair damp, his grin, bright, familiar, and completely disarming. "Marcie," he said, his voice warm. "You made it." Marcie blinked, thrown by the enthusiasm. "Of course," she said lightly. "Final review." Theo laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, sorry I've been MIA. It's been insane." Marcie nodded, her tone even. "I figured." Theo's smile faltered. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Marcie said, too quickly. Theo studied her, something flickering in his eyes. "You don't sound fine." Marcie forced a laugh. "Just tired." Theo hesitated, then let it go. "Come on, let me show you the magic." The loft looked stunning. The teal accent wall popped against crisp white trim. Sleek furniture gleamed under pendant lights. Plants softened the industrial edges, and the conference table, now properly placed, anchored the space like a statement piece. "It's perfect," Theo said, his voice reverent. "You nailed it." Marcie smiled, pride blooming despite the knot in her chest. "I'm glad you're happy." Theo turned to her, his expression earnest. "Happy doesn't cover it. You saved this company." Marcie swallowed, her voice steady. "It was my job." Theo stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Marcie." Before he could finish, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, grimaced. "Investor call. 2 minutes." Marcie nodded, masking her disappointment. "Go. I'll finish up here." Theo hesitated, then touched her arm. A brief, warm brush that lingered like a question. "Don't leave before I'm back." And then he was gone, his voice fading into the hallway. Marcie stood alone in the loft, staring at the teal wall. She felt foolish, like a woman who'd built castles out of coffee dates and rooftop laughter. Maybe Theo cared. Maybe he didn't. Either way, she was done guessing. She packed her things, her movements precise, and headed for the door. Theo returned 10 minutes later, breathless, grinning, only to find the loft empty. "Marcie?" he called, scanning the room. No answer. Her bag was gone. His chest tightened. He pulled out his phone, typing fast. "Theo, where'd you go?" No reply. Theo raked a hand through his hair, frustration simmering. He hadn't meant to vanish into calls all week. He'd wanted to text, to call, to ask her out properly. But every time he tried, something blew up. Investors, contracts, chaos. And now she thought he didn't care. Theo swore under his breath. He needed to fix this. Tonight. Marcie drove home in silence, her jaw tight. She wasn't angry. She didn't do angry. But she was done waiting for clarity that never came. Her phone buzzed. A text from Theo. "Theo, where'd you go?" Marcie stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. She typed, "Marcie home. Long day." The reply came instantly. "Theo, can I call you?" Marcie hesitated, then sent, "Marcie, not tonight." She set the phone down, her chest aching. She wasn't shutting the door. Not yet. But she needed space. To think, to breathe, to remember who she was before Theo Hartman tilted her world. Theo stared at her reply, his pulse pounding. Not tonight. He deserved that. But he wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 11. The grand gesture. Marcie had always believed in clean breaks. Edges sharp, lines straight, no messy overlaps. But the past week had been nothing but smudges. Theo's silence, her own spiraling thoughts, the ache she couldn't quite name. She told herself she was fine. She buried herself in work. She ignored the way her phone stayed stubbornly quiet. Until Friday morning when everything changed. Marcie was in her office, reviewing a client's floor plan, when the receptionist buzzed her. "Marcie, there's someone here for you." Marcie frowned. "Who?" Pause. Then, in a tone laced with amusement, "He says his name is Theo Hartman, and he's carrying furniture." Marcie blinked. "Furniture?" "Yes," the receptionist said, barely suppressing laughter. "And a plant. A very large plant." Marcie's pulse kicked. "Send him in." The door swung open, and there he was, Theo Hartman, grinning like a man on a mission, his hair wind-tossed, his arms full of chaos. In one hand, he held a sleek wooden chair. In the other, a monstera plant so big it looked like it belonged in a jungle. "Delivery from Marcie Greeves," he announced, his voice bright, his eyes warm. Marcie stared, stunned. "Theo, what are you doing?" "Grand gesture," Theo said, striding in like he owned the place. "Because texts suck and I'm done with mixed signals." He set the chair down with a flourish, then positioned the plant beside it like a crown jewel. "Tada!" Marcie blinked. "You brought me a chair and a plant?" Theo grinned. "Not just any chair, custom-made. Walnut, ergonomic, designed for queens who save startups." Marcie bit back a laugh. "And the plant? Symbolism," Theo said solemnly. "Growth, life. Also, it looked lonely at the nursery." Marcie laughed then, really laughed, the sound spilling out like sunlight. "You're ridiculous." Theo's grin softened. "Maybe, but I'm also sorry." Marcie's smile faded, her chest tightening. "Theo," he stepped closer, his voice low, earnest. "I screwed up. After the pitch, I got buried, calls, contracts, chaos. I thought I had time. I thought you'd understand. But I should have said something. I should have said, I didn't forget." Marcie swallowed, her heart thudding. "Forget what?" Theo's gaze locked on hers, steady and unflinching. "That I asked you to dinner. That I meant it. That I want more than coffee and accent walls." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air charged. Marcie searched his face. The grin, the sincerity, the vulnerability peeking through the charm, and something inside her shifted. "Theo," she began, but he held up a hand, his smile crooked. "Let me finish," he said softly. "You're incredible, Marcie. Smart, funny, fierce. You walked into my chaos and made it beautiful. And somewhere between paint swatches and coffee foam, I fell for you." Marcie's breath caught. Words tangled in her throat. Theo took another step, close enough that she could smell his cologne, warm, woodsy, familiar now. "So here's the deal," he said, his voice gentle. "Dinner. Tonight. No investors, no deadlines. Just us. Say yes." Marcie stared at him, her heart pounding like a drum. She'd spent 2 years building walls, clean, straight, safe. And Theo? He was a door flung wide open, sunlight pouring through. "Yes," she said softly. "Dinner sounds perfect." Theo's grin lit up the room. Finally. They stood there for a beat, laughter mingling with something heavier, something that felt like gravity. Theo reached for her hand, tentative, warm. Marcie let him, and in that simple touch the smudges vanished. The lines blurred, and for once she didn't care. That evening, Theo kept his promise. No rooftop bars, no champagne. Just a quiet bistro with soft lighting and food that tasted like comfort. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, laughter spilling between confessions. Theo told her about his childhood, how he once tried to build a treehouse and ended up with a ladder to nowhere. Marcie shared stories of design school disasters, like the time her model collapsed during a critique and she pretended it was conceptual. They laughed until their cheeks hurt. And when the laughter faded, Theo reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm glad you said yes," he murmured. Marcie smiled, her heart steady now. "Me too." When he walked her to her car, the night was cool, the stars scattered like diamonds. Theo hesitated, then leaned in, not tentative this time, not almost, but certain. The kiss was soft at first, then deepened, warm and sure, like something they'd both been waiting for. When they finally pulled apart, Marcie was breathless, her pulse singing. Theo grinned, his forehead resting against hers. "Worth the wait." Marcie laughed, her voice husky. "Definitely." Driving home, Marcie felt the shift, the quiet, seismic kind that changes everything. For 2 years, her life had been steady, predictable, safe. Tonight, it tilted. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to straighten it. Chapter 12. Love in full color. Marcie had always believed that design was about creating spaces where people felt at home. Tonight, as she stood in Theo's loft, now transformed into a vibrant, functional masterpiece, she realized the same was true for love. The teal accent wall glowed under soft pendant lights. The conference table gleamed like a promise kept. Plants thrived in corners, their leaves catching the golden spill of evening sun. It was everything Theo had wanted. Professional yet creative. A space that whispered innovation instead of chaos. And yet, the real transformation wasn't in the room. It was in her. Theo appeared from the kitchen, 2 glasses of wine in hand, his grin crooked and warm. "Designer extraordinaire," he said, handing her a glass. "To the woman who saved my company and stole my sanity." Marcie laughed, taking the glass. "That's a dramatic toast." Theo winked. "You inspire drama." She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. They clinked glasses, the sound soft and bright, and for a moment everything felt easy, like they'd been doing this for years. They curled up on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. Theo confessed he'd once tried to build a standing desk out of cinder blocks and plywood. Marcie admitted she had a Pinterest board titled Spaces I'll Never Afford. They laughed until their cheeks hurt, until the loft felt less like a workspace and more like a home. Then Theo grew quiet, his gaze thoughtful. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think success was about numbers, investors, revenue, growth charts." Marcie tilted her head. "And now," Theo smiled faintly, "now I think it's about people. The ones who show up when everything's falling apart. The ones who make you believe you're not crazy for chasing a dream." Marcie felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Theo." He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers, tentative, then sure. "You're that person for me, Marcie." Her breath caught. Words tangled in her throat. She wasn't used to declarations. Not like this, raw and unpolished, stripped of charm. It was terrifying. And beautiful. She began, but Theo shook his head, his smile gentle. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just, don't run." Marcie laughed softly, her voice husky. "I'm not running." Theo's grin widened, relief flickering in his eyes. "Good." They kissed then, slow, deep, unhurried, like a conversation without words. When they pulled apart, Marcie was breathless, her pulse singing. Theo rested his forehead against hers, his voice low. "Worth the wait." Marcie smiled, her heart steady now. Definitely. They might have stayed like that forever. Wrapped in warmth, the city humming beyond the windows, if not for the knock at the door. Theo groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." Marcie laughed, pulling back. "Expecting someone?" "No," Theo said, rising reluctantly. He opened the door and froze. "Surprise," Abigail sang, sweeping in with James behind her, both carrying takeout bags and grins that spelled trouble. Marcie stared, mortified. "Abigail." "James." "What are you?" "Celebrating," Abigail said cheerfully. "Theo's big win. And maybe your big win too." James smirked. "Nice loft, sis. Cozy." Marcie groaned, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe this." Theo laughed, utterly unbothered. "Come on in. The more, the merrier." Dinner was chaos. Abigail teasing, James cracking jokes, Theo playing host like a pro. Marcie wanted to be annoyed, but she couldn't. Not when laughter spilled like wine. Not when Theo's hand found hers under the table, warm and steady. For the first time in years, Marcie felt something she hadn't even realized she'd lost. Home. Later, when Abigail and James finally left, after enough winks and innuendos to last a lifetime, Theo turned to Marcie, his grin soft. "Your family's amazing," he said. Marcie laughed. "They're relentless." Theo stepped closer, his voice low. "So am I." Marcie smiled, her heart tilting like a picture frame finally set straight. "Good." That night, as she curled up beside Theo, the city lights spilling through the windows, Marcie realized something. Love wasn't about perfect timing or flawless plans. It was about color, the bold, messy kind that made life vibrant. And for the first time in a long time, her world felt painted in full. Chapter 13. Epilogue, Designs of the Heart. 6 months later, Marcie stood in the middle of a sunlit office, hands on her hips, surveying the space with a critical eye. It wasn't Hartman Innovations this time. It was a boutique bakery expanding into a second location. The walls were painted a soft blush, shelves lined with rustic wood, pendant lights casting a golden glow over marble counters. It was perfect. Almost. "Thoughts?" Theo's voice floated from behind her, warm and teasing. Marcie turned, smiling at the man leaning casually against the doorframe. He looked different now. Still charming, still chaotic, but steadier somehow. Success suited him. So did happiness. "It needs greenery," Marcie said, gesturing toward the empty corner. "Something tall. Maybe a fiddle-leaf figure." Theo grinned. "You and your plants." Marcie smirked. "You started it." Theo laughed, crossing the room to slip an arm around her waist. Fair point. Life had changed in ways Marcie hadn't imagined. Hartman Innovations was thriving. Investor secured. App launched. Chaos tamed. Mostly. Theo had kept his promise. No drama. No games. Just steady, messy, wonderful love. They'd navigated late nights, sibling dinners, and one memorable argument about throw pillows. They're decorative, Theo, not useless. Through it all, they'd learned something vital. Love, like design, wasn't about perfection. It was about creating space, room for laughter, for flaws, for dreams that didn't always fit neatly on a blueprint. Abigail and James were thriving too. James had proposed to Jenna in the most James way possible, on a hiking trail with a ring tied to a granola bar. Jenna cried. Abigail filmed it. Marcie planned the engagement party because of course she did. The three musketeers were still inseparable, their bond stronger than ever, now with Theo folded into the mix like a piece that had always belonged. That evening, Marcie and Theo hosted a small dinner at their apartment, a space they designed together, every detail a blend of her precision and his whimsy. The teal accent wall made a cameo, paired with shelves Theo insisted on building himself. They're only slightly crooked, he'd said proudly. Abigail and James arrived with champagne, Jenna with dessert, laughter spilling through the door like sunlight. Look at you two, Abigail teased, eyeing Marcie and Theo curled up on the couch. Domestic bliss. Marcie rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. Bliss is a strong word. Theo grinned. I'd call it accurate. James raised his glass. To Marcie and Theo, proof that chaos and order can coexist. Marcie laughed, clinking her glass against Theo's. And to family, she added. The original design. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the city hummed beyond the windows, Marcie stood on the balcony, the night air cool against her skin. Theo joined her, slipping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Penny for your thoughts, he murmured. Marcie smiled, her gaze on the skyline. Just thinking how far we've come. Theo kissed her temple, his voice soft. And how far we'll go. Marcie turned, meeting his eyes, the same eyes that had once been a whirlwind, now steady and sure. With you, she said quietly. Anywhere. Theo's grin was slow, tender. Good answer. As they stood there, wrapped in warmth and possibility, Marcie realized something. Love wasn't a straight line. It was color, bold, messy, vibrant. It was laughter in chaos, comfort in imperfection, beauty in the unexpected. And for the first time in her life, Marcie Greeves felt like she was living in the most beautiful design of all.